Good evening, my fellow Americans. This is the 5th of June, 2025 edition of A Quiet Rage. If you're paying attention to the news, no doubt you know the number one story on everybody's mind. It's the feud which erupted this afternoon between the president of these United States, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk. And I will talk about that, but I've mentioned this before. I will go an entire week from one episode to the next thinking, this is what I'm going to talk about, this is what I'm going to talk about. And then the day of, on Thursday, something happens. Well, I will not be deterred. Because I've been thinking for the last week, well, really for the last 2 or 3 days, about what I want to talk about today. And so I'm gonna stick with that. We'll get to Trump and Musk and their little girl fight. Well, that's not very nice. Their little their spat at the end. What I want to start talking about, and not the least of which because this is Pride Month, is the phony tough guy who is our Secretary of Defense, or SecDef, in the military parlance, one Mr. Pete Hegseth. This dude is a piece of work. He thinks he can tell the Army Rangers what their standards ought to be for Rangers, despite the fact that he doesn't wear a Ranger tab. He doesn't think that women should be in combat roles, despite the fact that there have been women in combat roles for a minute now. And it's not like the United States military was the first military to put women in combat roles. We came pretty late to the party, considering how, in theory, how progressive we're supposed to be as a country. But that's a whole nother thing. A few things have taken place right at the beginning, this is the 5th day of Pride Month. A few things have taken place in these first 5 days of Pride Month, which would make me say, would make anyone with half a brain say, well, this is clearly the White House, the Trump administration, purposely trying to kind of poke everybody in the eye, or the LGBTQ plus community in the eye. Say, oh yeah, you think you've got Pride Month? We're going to do the opposite of that. Now, most people, I'm sure, in the Trump administration, in the Department of Defense, would say, no, we're not. This is nothing. It's purely coincidence that this is all happening in Pride Month. And I might be inclined to buy that, because, as we all know, homophobia, transphobia, bigotry in general knows no season. These are year-round, 24/7, waking and sleeping things. Sorry, the dogs have entered the chat. Hi, can we be quiet this time around, please? And thank you. Okay. Yeah, bigotry, homophobia. No, yeah, hello, Mr. Bandit. These things, they're not you can't keep them in a box. They're happening all the time. But I'm not buying it. I think this is, and I'll tell you why. The White House the press secretary, when asked about Pride Month, specifically said, no, the White House is not going to be recognizing Pride Month in any way. But that something about the president is happy to be the president of all Americans, regardless of sex, race, creed, all that. Which I don't buy that for a second, because he keeps calling people like me radical left lunatics, and that's... Hey! Hush. That's not really filling me with a whole lot of confidence. Okay. But I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all, because he keeps calling people like me a radical left lunatics, and that's just not the language that you use to convey that you want to be the president of everybody. So what? So the White House will not be recognizing Pride Month. Okay, fine, whatever. Separately, Representative Mary Miller, Republican of Illinois, has introduced a resolution, this happened on Tuesday, so on the 3rd, that would establish June as Family Month, which she said would, quote, reject the lie of pride and instead honor God's timeless and perfect design, unquote. Here's something funny I discovered when I was doing my research on the electric internet for this episode. There is a National Work and Family Month. It's October. It's been that way since the United States Senate designated it thus by resolution in 2003. And that resolution was affirmed by the House. So we've got that already. And the Right Honorable Representative Mary Miller should take a flying leap. But there's two other much bigger things. One medium-sized thing and one much bigger thing. The planned renaming of the USNS, which is United States Naval Ship. It's not a warship. It's not a USS, which is a warship. It's a supply vessel. The plans to rename the USNS Harvey Milk to something else. What? I don't know that we know yet. Just announced the other day, at the start of Pride Month. Why is that? How's that relevant? Well, you could be forgiven, especially if you're my age or younger, of not knowing who Harvey Milk was. I was vaguely aware of him. I've learned a lot more about him in the last 24 hours. He served in the Navy. He was an officer in the Navy. Let me get my details correct here. That's the wrong mouse. Hold on. He served during Korea. He was on a submarine rescue ship, the USS Kittiwake, ASR-13, and was later transferred to Naval Station San Diego, where he served as a diving instructor. He was forced to resign and accept an other than honorable discharge as a result of his homosexuality having been found out. Now, despite what I have been accused of, which is just automatically swallowing hook, line, and sinker whatever headline comes from my favorite news outlet, which I assure you is not CNN and not MSNBC, both of which I've been accused of. If you're going to accuse me of something, be right. I don't just hear or read the headline and say, well, now I know who I'm angry at for the day. If I have some, existing knowledge of the topic, well, then maybe I don't need to get into it. But in this case, I did. And I've been accused of having Reddit brain. I'm not sure what that necessarily is. But there was, I was on the U.S. Navy subreddit, and the subject of renaming the ship came up. And there's superstition involved. We sailors are very superstitious about a lot of things. And the logical part of my brain says, this is, agrees with you. That the superstition is not a reason to do or not do a thing. You should do or not do a thing because it's logical. It makes sense. It's tested and reliable. What can I tell you? I, myself, and all of my shipmates on the commissioning crew of my second vessel, I assure you, we watched with laser focus as the bottle of champagne was broken across the hull, and breathed a huge sigh of relief, even though we knew, deep down we knew, it didn't mean anything. But we all breathed a huge sigh of relief when the bottle actually shattered. Sailors are weird about these things. And this is not a no atheists in foxholes. I'm not going down that. Again, I could do that later. We won't go that way. But one thing that I assure you that Pete Hegseth has not considered is that renaming a vessel is a huge, huge pain in the ass. Not the least of which because everybody on that ship has to buy a new hat and a new belt buckle. And you've all got to change your address if you're getting mail on that ship. It's more than just a stroke of the pen is what I'm saying. And so I was talking about Reddit. On the U.S. Navy subreddit, there was somebody that said that we could honor people that had served, someone who had served in the Navy prior, who was homosexual or lesbian or LGBTQ of any sort, whatever, that didn't have a particular spot on his past, the way that Harvey Milk does, and referenced in particular a romantic relationship with a 16-year-old boy by the name of Jack Glennon McKinley. I've been accused of using a disreputable source, Wikipedia, but that's where I get this, so. Now, this was in 1963. And I am not excusing that kind of behavior whatsoever. But I will say that nationally, in our society, our attitude towards relationships with people, with young adults, teenagers, has changed. I'm not excusing what Harvey Milk did. I'm not saying that it's right. It's not. It certainly is not. A person who is, at the time, 34 years old should not be dating a 16-year-old. That's improper. That should not be happening. Now, if the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Navy had put out a statement saying that due to or based on this improper relationship with a 16-year-old, a minor child, we have decided it is not in the best interest of the United States or the United States Navy to continue to honor Harvey Milk with having a vessel named after him. That would be perfectly understandable, right? Did they do that? No. No, they didn't. Which is how I know that this is just another poke in the eye to the LGBTQ community. Oh, this is someone you revere? This is someone you look up to? Well, we're going to take that away from you. What does it say in the statement? I haven't been able to find it in its entirety, but I do have a military.com article, which I will link so you can see it as well. The memo reviewed by military.com for this story noted that the renaming was done so that there is, quote, alignment with President and SecDef, Secretary of Defense, objectives, and SecNav, Secretary of the Navy, priorities of reestablishing the warrior culture, end quote. Other than being a homosexual, Harvey Milk served the United States Navy and his country honorably. The only reason he had an other than honorable discharge is because that's what they did to gay people back then. The relationship with young Mr. McKinley, that didn't happen until after Harvey had been discharged. His service was honorable. Here's another thing, because it goes deeper than that. It's not just that the USNS Harvey Milk is going to be renamed. Here are some other ships that are under review, and I will link. This is from an NPR article. That is actually my favorite news outlet, by the way, if you're wondering. It's NPR. Here is a list, and I don't know that it is a complete list, but it is somewhat lengthy, of other ships in the John Lewis class of USNS supply ships that are up for review. USNS Thurgood Marshall, named after the first African American to serve on the Supreme Court. Yeah, we can't have that, can we? USNS Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another Supreme Court justice. You may have heard of her. USNS Harriet Tubman. No, certainly we wouldn't want to name a vessel after somebody who helped to free slaves and led Union soldiers, would we? No, we wouldn't want that. People might get the wrong idea. The Dolores Huerta and the Cesar Chavez, Hispanic labor leaders. The Lucy Stone, named after a 19th century suffragette, and the USNS Medgar Evers, another civil rights leader from the 1960s, who, like Harvey Milk, was assassinated. Please tell me how any of those renaming those supply vessels. We're not talking about aircraft carriers. We're not talking about capital ships. How renaming any of those serves anything? I heard a clip from a speech that the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, gave. Who was it? He gave to as a keynote address at Special Operations Forces Week. I've never heard of that before, but it's a thing. Where did it? Now I lost it by scrolling all the way to the top. Hold on 1 second, I'll find it. Here we go. I'll now quote from his speech. Everything starts and ends with warriors, from training to the battlefield. We are leaving wokeness and weakness behind. No more pronouns. No more climate change obsession. No more emergency vaccine mandates. No more dudes in dresses. We're done with that shit. End quote. Now, I'm straight, but lots of my homies ain't. I have served with 2 submarine sailors of whom I know are transgender. They had not transitioned when I served with them. And I would love for the Secretary of Defense to try and explain to anybody how being transgender negatively affects combat readiness. Because the 2, they were men when I served with them. The 2 men with whom I served, who have since transitioned to women, their service was on par. It was acceptable. It was acceptable is not even. It was honorable, for fuck's sake. I don't want to tell too many stories because I don't necessarily want to identify who they might be, because they don't deserve any extra smoke for just living their lives. There is nothing about being transgender, nothing, that makes you unfit to serve in the United States military. Nothing. There may be other issues. Just because you're transgender, just because you're anything, doesn't guarantee anything one way or the other. That's not a reason you should be kicking people out of the military. That's bigotry. That's transphobic. That's hateful. We're supposed to be better than that. My shipmates, my fellow service members deserve better than that. And this clown, Hegseth, thinks he knows better. No more pronouns. Sir, pronouns are parts of speech. Did you not pay attention in your elementary English class? No more dudes in dresses. That really cracks me up. because there's now Hegseth wouldn't know anything about this because he wasn't in the Navy. There's a tradition in the Navy called crossing the line when a ship crosses the equator. It's a whole thing. We go nuts. We take, a day, 12 hours, 24 hours, and we go crazy. We have, I won't get into the details, but we get a little goofy. We blow off some steam. There are halfway night celebrations. If you're on a 6-month deployment, about 3 months into the deployment, when the mission allows, you hold a halfway night celebration. And quite frequently, one of the fixtures of these celebrations will be a contest in which male sailors will dress in drag and compete for Miss whatever the name of the ship is. Say it's the USS Wisconsin. It'll be the Miss Wisconsin pageant. And you'll put a mop, hopefully a clean mop, on your head, and that'll be your hair, and you wear a dress, and it's fun. It's all in fun. Now, I'm not saying that a Miss Wisconsin pageant on halfway night is the same as being transgender. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is this dude doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. And again, nothing about being transgender by itself should be disqualifying for military service. That's ridiculous. That is transphobia. That is unfounded hatred and bigotry. That's all that is. I heard there's a jet pilot who she is in the Virginia National Guard. I heard a story. I heard her speaking on NPR as I was coming home from work today. Yes, I actually have a job, MAGA, despite you trying to accuse me of being a freeloader. I actually work for a living. She was saying, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not self-reporting. If they want to kick me out, they're going to have to explain to me. They're going to have to put in writing why I am unfit for service. And to her, I say, cheers, ma'am. Good on you. More power to you. Happy Pride Month, everybody. Your presidential administration and your Department of Defense hates you, thinks you are less than. And people wonder why the LGBTQ community has a higher unaliving rate than the rest of the population. Could it be because they're constantly told that they're not worth it? Not that they're less than? That could have something to do with it. I said I would talk about the Trump-Musk feud. It is 9:23 p.m. right now. I haven't looked at the news or Blue Sky or any social media since I started filming this. Here's what I know. I made a short video earlier today because Trump in the Oval Office during a press availability with I think it was the incoming German chancellor, took some questions and somebody asked him about Musk, who just recently departed the administration at the end of his 130 days of whatever stupid shit that was. And Trump implied that Musk had Trump derangement syndrome. And later, I don't know if it was directly in response or if there was back and forth between, but later, earlier this evening or this afternoon, Musk tweeted, might as well, something along the lines of, might as well drop the big bomb now. Trump is in the Epstein files. That's why he hasn't released them. And then signed off with, have a nice day, DJT, or something like that. I don't know about you. I'm not surprised. I basically knew that Trump was in the Epstein files. That's not a revelation. But it's amusing. It's amusing to me because it's going to hurt Trump. Obviously, the things that happened to get people in the Epstein files are awful and not the least bit amusing. And I feel terrible that for anyone involved in that, caught up in that, any of the young women, that they have to see these headlines and relive whatever trauma that they went through. That is obviously unfortunate. And it's sad that their trauma has to take place alongside this absolute shit show of an administration that the two most powerful people are now having an ugly divorce in front of everybody. So I have no idea, by the time that this episode goes live, who knows what else will come out. As I said, every time I think I know what I want to talk about, every time I make an episode and it goes live, something new comes out, and I'm like, well, if I had waited 12 hours, I could have talked about that. But I'd never put an episode out. Yeah, it's gonna be stupid is what it's gonna be, and we're all just gonna have to sit and watch, which is unfortunate. I don't have a what can we do necessarily other than the usual for this episode, other than the usual, which is find your like-minded folks. And gather. As I've said many times before, a lot of stuff has already been broken by this administration. A lot more will be broken by the time this administration leaves office. And it's going to take a lot of work to fix it. And we're going to need a deep bench. So get involved, gather, commiserate. It's very important. That's all I got for you this week. If, like me, you give a shit about people whose sexuality is different than yours, and you recognize their humanity, then keep your powder dry and keep your quiet rage. And to everyone, good night, my fellow Americans.